Well, hi, Carter. Thank you for joining me today. Obviously, I'm Anna with Elite Talent, and we specialize in recruiting for pre-sales. And I thought it would be awesome to bring you on live. Obviously, you're a team lead and actually director of pre-sales, right, at Team Ohana.
Mhm.
Cool. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about with pre-sales overall, but I would just love to start with, obviously your experience and have an open-ended conversation when it comes to challenges, wins, and lessons that you've learned through, just throughout your career. But first, if you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you even got started in this, because I know it's not the most common route to go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everybody who ends up in pre-sales, they all have a story. Mine is no different.
Yes.
I actually originally started my career in mechanical engineering in the power generation space, and
Okay.
through a mentor of mine was told, hey, if you don't want to be an engineer that manages engineers, go get an MBA and just find some more sales and business oriented roles that you can really apply your technical skills to. And just through that, I somehow ended up moving into almost like a proposals type of role in a government technology vendor that said, hey, we want to become a SaaS company. And I said, SaaS, what is that? I want to learn all about this. And just so happened that I was in a large pre-sales organization and ended up managing a team in that group. And my mentor, who was the VP of pre-sales at that company, ended up getting me plugged into the pre-sales collective. And I was exposed to this whole world that I didn't know existed of people who spend all day, every day, just hearing people talk about their business problems and how they want technology to solve those problems. And they just use technology as a bridge to really having a strategic business conversation. And I looked at that and said, that's what I want to do. That's my superpower. That's what I'm good at. And I just went all in, dove headfirst into that world. And it led to being able to do solutions consulting at a Series C HR tech company. And then now where I'm at today, where I actually get to build the solutions function from the ground up at a small startup, grow the team, hire people, train, work on all of these things around process and really set the standard for what pre-sales excellence looks like. So it's been quite a journey, but I say that it was a lot of chance conversations that just turned into the right opportunities at the right time.
That's awesome. So then your first experience with pre-sales, you jumped straight into managing a team?
So my first experience with pre-sales was almost like RFP specialist. So we did no demos, but we were technical experts. We worked in a pre-sales organization. And within 4 months of having that role, the organization had 2 different business units and slammed them together. And all of a sudden, instead of being on a team in one unit that reported to a solutions consulting manager, they wanted to create a totally new team out of thin air and said, well, who's going to lead it? And they looked at a guy who was fresh into his career getting an MBA that seemed to know what he was talking about and said, he can lead it. And lead it I did. And it was messy for a bit. And then I got some mentorship and growth and learned how to manage while on the fly.
That's funny. Well, sometimes, what the best way to learn is just getting thrown in it. And then you'll figure it out. Usually when your shoulders are against the wall, there's no other way but getting out of it. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. And you've built and led SE teams. So what's one lesson you've learned that any aspiring SE leader should really know?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to think about is a lot of SE leaders, especially frontline managers, I see really get caught up with is things like workflows, reporting metrics. How do we prove our impact? What's the right comp plan? In my mind, those are details that actually aren't terribly concerning to me. What I'm much more focused on is really elevating solutions consulting to be a strategic function and really asking yourself, if solutions consulting does what it's supposed to, what do we anticipate is the net value add to every function in the organization? And just go function by function. And so we all know what we want to do for sales leadership, right? We want to drive ARR. We want to drive bigger contracts, shorter sales cycles, maybe expansion revenue or renewals. But thinking a little bit more broadly, think, well, what kind of impact do I want to have on our product and engineering teams? I want to help them be more focused. I want to be a conduit for product feedback. What kind of impact do I want to have for my CEO? I want to help drive and fuel our organizational business strategy. So really the biggest thing that I think SE leaders should focus on, especially if they're first timers,
Yeah.
is like, you probably have the technical chops. Like, the biggest thing you need to work on is that strategic business level mindset and learning to operate cross-functionally and put yourself in the shoes of every function you interface with, because you're going to interface with just about all of them.
Yeah. What, in your opinion, and I see, well, depends on the product too, but some companies have different ways of measuring success for SEs. Like, what do you feel like is maybe the one thing that should be pretty standard across all companies?
Yeah, I think it should be non-negotiable that there is a split of close rates and ACVs with an SE and without an SE. I mean, that is universal across every organization. Some organizations will look at what they call the technical win, but
Yeah.
kind of like what I said earlier, the solutions consulting function is rapidly approaching this world where you can't hire technical people to have a technical win. It's a really murky gray area in a lot of organizations these days. You
Yeah.
hire SEs because you win more, you close bigger deals, you drive more strategic partnerships. And those are metrics that organizations are already measuring that you can plug into from day one and just show. And a very practical example of this in my prior organization, we were able to show, hey, when you have a solutions consultant associated with your deal, that's a 3 times higher win rate. At that point, your CRO doesn't care about technical wins as a metric.
Yeah.
Maybe we could have measured it, but at that point, it's really obvious. You drive a bottom line that our board of directors cares greatly about. And you are clearly, and we actually measure this, we were the most cost efficient function in the organization. One SC equated to such a huge output in ARR value to the business that you almost had to ask yourself, why are we not hiring more of these people? There's such a huge force multiplier on metrics we already measure and care about. So that's where you want to focus. Speak the language of the business leaders you're trying to negotiate with. Don't try and introduce new measures that are fuzzy and arbitrarily before you're actually recognizing dollars in business.
I love that. And I agree. Anytime I've been involved with companies and we've measured like the difference of, like you said, with an SE versus without, at least in a conservative way, it's been like a 30% increase in sales and bottom line when it comes to SEs being involved. So I'm glad that we're on the same mindset when it comes to that. And on the other hand, I definitely agree that sometimes either as leaders or as business owners, there's so many things you can track from any sort of KPIs that sometimes it's like kind of like that shiny object of like, oh, let's track this too. Let's track that too. And it's like, okay, great. But what does actually bring the results? Like, what is affecting the direct results and the bottom line that we should track, that makes sense for the company. And then once we have that down, then yeah, let's track one more thing just to add it on there if creates any difference at all. So that's pretty good. Obviously, we're on the same page for that. So I love that. Yeah. Specifically in terms of like the SE role, what do you think should be, and it could be company dependent too, obviously you can tell me based on your expertise, but what do you think should be the split between like, sales versus like the technical side?
Yeah. So in the solutions consulting world, I find that there's in general, like 2 types of SE orgs. There is going to be more of your tech first, right? These are going to be organizations that do sell a very technical product. I'm thinking like companies like ServiceNow. Yeah. And then the world that I operate in is functional consulting, where you're selling an off-the-shelf product that like maybe there's some technical elements to it, maybe a couple calls with IT or some integration elements, but by and large, you're selling to a non-technical buyer in a business function that's trying to get business value out. And so in that instance, I actually tend to index much more heavily on, do you know how to speak the language of executives? Do you have executive presence? Do you have strong customer communication skills? Do you understand how buyers buy? Like I can teach you how the product works. I mean, that's how I learned. I don't have a computer engineering background, but I had to go and figure out, what is an API? I had no idea when I first got into this world 6 or 7 years ago. But now I can sit down and talk with a CTO and you wouldn't know the difference. Those things are learnable. Those things are teachable. What's much harder in a functional consulting type of role where you're selling at that executive level, which company isn't selling at that level these days, is being able to just put yourself in the shoes of how do buyers buy? How do they assess problems? It's actually almost notorious. I've spoken with a number of solutions consulting technology vendors that SE leaders have actually been starting to get this reputation that we're bad buyers. We know how to help people from a sales cycle perspective, but when we try and do it ourselves, we get too caught up in the weeds, in the details, in perfect solutions. And we get to that executive sign off and it's like, it's the perfect solution. I figured everything out. And the CEO says, that's great. That's not on my list of priorities. That's not on the agenda of what we're going to talk about. That's not priority fundable. I'm kicking this down the line for 6 months. And so you need to learn how to think like your CEO is thinking, because that's how the CEOs you're talking to are thinking. And if you can work it internally, then you can work it externally. And that's actually what I'm going through right now. I'm doing software evaluations and getting my CEO to say yes to purchases. And I'm learning so much about how do I get other people's CEOs to do the exact same thing.
I love that. Yeah, it's true. And obviously in the purchase process, like whenever you're selling to a buyer, there's going to be different types of people involved. And I think it's super important for an SC to understand if they're talking to the executive level, like how they should talk to them, what are they actually interested in, versus if they're talking to the person that's going to be using the software or, on a day-to-day, and, what solution it solves for their client or themselves. So I agree. I think there should be an understanding of who you're talking to and how to apply all the knowledge you have, and, make sure that you're filtering it to what the CEO wants versus, the person that's going to be using it on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, totally. And many companies, and I think it's pretty normal. We're always companies always have a ton of priorities. And usually hiring is like, okay, we don't need it. And then all of a sudden you're like drowning and you're like, I need it yesterday. That's usually, at least when I talk to companies, I'm like, hey, what's your timeline? And they're like, last week. So what is your take on like hiring proactively versus reactively? And do you feel like there's like a fine balance of when to do it? Have you discovered that yourself yet?
Yeah. So there's a top-down and a bottoms-up approach to this. So from a top-down perspective, as an SE leader, this goes back to what I said earlier of you got to have those business chops. You got to speak the language that your sales leaders, your business leaders are saying. You need to have a view into what is our revenue goal for this year, right? Hey, we're a $10 million company and we want to be 15 by the end of this year. Great. What's your ACV? How much top-line funnel do you need to get there? What's your conversion rate on the bottom end for SE driven and non-SE driven deals? Great. We have some rudimentary metrics on opportunity flow and volume. How many of those opportunities are going to have a demo? How many demos do we think they're going to need? And then from there, you can very easily say, okay, if I need to do 200 demos in a given year, more than last year, well, I need 2 more SEs to get that, whatever that number may be. From a bottoms-up approach, it's the opposite. You just go to your SCs and say, hey, how heavily loaded are you? How many demos can I put on top of you from a capacity standpoint?
Yeah.
And if they tell you I can do no more than 12 for mid-market and I could do no more than 8 for enterprise, then you would just ladder that up and say, okay, my current SEs can do 300 demos a year split across these cohorts of customers. And you just put the 2 and 2 together and say, where are my gaps? And if you have gaps, then it's really easy to start timing it. Typically an SC, right, you're going to need anywhere from 3 to 6 months to have them be impactful, depending on the product. Some may be longer if it's really technical. But you just tell yourself, okay, I need to hire a quarter in advance. And if that's the case, I can look quarter by quarter at my revenue growth that my sales leaders are telling me and just say, where's my breaking point? June. Okay, I need to hire an SE in March. Then I should probably be sourcing right now. And I should make that business case internally. So I think that's really the best way to go about it if you want to do it proactively. And then when the organization says no, and sometimes they'll say no, it allows you, one, to go back to your sales leaders and say, okay, which of these demos did we think we're going to demo to? What are we going to say no to? You tell me what's on the chopping block, because this is my capacity model. I can't invent more time. And then you can go internally and say, how can I be more efficient? and maximize the staff that I have. So it really helps to drive all of those things when you have that top-down view of your revenue goals met with the bottom up of how much time are your SEs actually spending on their activities, and where's the gap between those two goals.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you said that, because it's true. There's definitely two ways of doing things. And I do agree that, once you hit that capacity and you do go back to your leaders and, then you're like, hey, this is how much I can handle. Who do you want to be on the chopping block? Obviously, they don't love to hear that, right? So they're going to make sure that whatever it is, we can be able to, maximize all opportunities in front of us. So yeah, I love that. Do you have a preferred way, like for you personally, at least from what you've seen? Is it like, I prefer, doing it the top to bottom versus like bottom to top? Like what are your preferences?
Yeah, I would much rather do top down, because usually if you're doing it bottoms up, it's your SEs telling you like, I'm breaking, which by that point you now have to tell them, okay, in 6 months I can help you.
Yeah, right.
Which is not a great place to be. Whereas top down, that I think is where you can have the most proactive view of next 12 months revenue growth and opportunity flow. And then that can tell you when should I anticipate beginning to hire. And then if the business comes back and says, well, here's when we can release headcount when we hit X milestone, that those are much more practical gaps to have an executive level conversation around, rather than it looks like an the SE team's complaining because they're busy.
Right.
It's a much more educated view of, we are essential to us reaching that revenue goal. In order to do so, here's my capacity breaking point. If you don't, here's the risk it presents on our conversions. And that puts our $5 million ARR bookings plan into jeopardy if we don't act. And that's a lot easier to get people to rally around and to actually agree on.
Absolutely. I agree. I think that when somebody especially is over capacity, not only you risk, missing out on, whatever potential demos that you might need to add to your list, but they're going to be so caught up into, oh, I got to move on to the next one, that they might not even be fully present and giving it their all or as much as they can, right? They don't do it maliciously or intentionally, but because they're so busy, they're just trying to hit all the goals and all the quotas. And it's like, there's a breaking point, like you said, and you definitely don't want to be in that position, because then that's where friction starts happening from employee to leaders. Is like, I'm too busy. They don't care, it's like that whole thing starts happening. And obviously it's harder to bridge that gap once you're there. But yeah, that's pretty awesome. What do you think separates like a good SE versus like an A player?
Yeah, I would say, going back to something I mentioned earlier, it's that executive presence, right? The best SEs I have worked with, and AEs have given me this feedback as well, is they're the kind of person that, a customer CFO could out of the blue say, I need a demo now. And you could tap them on the shoulder and say, you got this, and I have no reservations, right?
Yeah.
And it's that ability to really just get into the mind of your buyer at each persona, at each stage. What are they thinking about? What are they afraid of? How do they make decisions? And how do you get them to decision faster, right? It is not, and I tell people this all the time, it is not who's the smartest person in the room. I mean, I'll be upfront. There are people in my company right now, and in every company I've worked with, that were always smarter than me when it came to the product. But I made it my obsession to be able to sit in front of a customer and understand, in essence, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the business result? Who else cares? How do we pull them in? How do we make you look good? Instead of hearing like, hey, can you pull in this custom field or do this workflow? And you just answer the question. No, like you got to elevate and see the problem behind the problem. The leader that they're reporting to that wants this, why do they want it? What are they thinking? Operating at that level is so critical. It's so hard to teach. It's the consulting part of solutions consulting. And I think a lot of SE organizations, they can lose sight of that, or they can diminish the importance of that factor.
Yeah, very true. How much of that do you think is, teachable versus like, on training? Then obviously you as a leader, like how much of that do you train versus like there has to be a component where they either get it or it's a skill set? Like, what do you think is the balance there?
Yeah, I think the actual mechanisms of how executives think can be taught. I did not walk into the pre-sales world thinking I know how to talk to a CFO. I was
Yeah.
utterly petrified of the idea of talking to a CFO. I'm like, these people, like, they handle the company's money. They've got big degrees. They've got huge career. Like, there's no way I could talk to these people. And it's just understanding that, like, no, you just need to see the business the way they see it. And that's very teachable. I think where it's more innate to the individual is from a personality perspective, finding somebody who can be very systems level in their thinking process, where they don't necessarily need a script. They don't need technical questions with technical answers. They can walk into a very ambiguous environment and lean into that ambiguity and just lead with curiosity at the forefront. I find that there are some very clear personality traits around intellectual openness and this idea of, like, thinking high level that is really critical to look for in those individuals. And you can tell immediately when someone, like, that's a weakness for them, because you put them in a curveball situation and you can see, like, everybody struggles in those situations, but you can see they're struggling in the sense that they don't necessarily know how to elevate their thought process because it's so uncomfortable for them. It's such a stretch for just their makeup, and that's okay. But you can tell in those types of environments, and executives love to derail your conversations and put you in
absolutely. Yeah, I agree. You definitely have, like you said, you definitely have to have the understanding of how they work, what is important to them more than anything. And I believe that all of that can be taught too. And again, a little portion of it obviously has to be from skill set, the ability to, like you said, if they derail the conversation, okay, how do we bring it back into what's important for us? And there has to be a fine balance to make sure that both sides are getting in, their side of the story, or, to make sure that we're pushing through the sale. Cool. Is there any advice that you have for, like, any aspiring leader SEs, or anything that you've learned, like, throughout the year, that it's like, if I knew now if I knew then what I know now would have helped me a ton in leading people?
Yeah. I think it's something that I had to learn the hard way is really learning how to be a good coach. I think that's probably one of the biggest priorities that an SE leader can have. I mean, think about what your sales counterparts are doing as sales managers. Like, the best sales managers are not micromanaging their AEs and running their sales process for them. They're stepping in and identifying learning moments. Hey, in this call, you said X, Y happened. Here's what I would have done differently to help build on these skills. You're building out the kind of profile SC you want, and you're showing your people how to navigate that. And the only way they get there is through you really acting as in a coaching capacity. And I think part of that, from a very tangible skill development perspective, is learning how to just give good feedback. Again, I think you have a lot of people that get into the game through the technical route. They become SEs because they know the product and they're, pretty good at talking to customers. And somewhere along the way, as an SE leader, you need to set that standard for, here's how we present ourselves. Here's the kind of professionals we're going to be. Here's what a good demo looks like, and holding people to those standards and just giving routine feedback. And you will be amazed at how quickly the people who have that raw talent of, like, thinking at that executive level will very quickly emerge and just start creating huge impact. And the people that don't, you can start to identify very quickly how to, manage out, or whatever that strategy looks like, just through communication and feedback channels. It's an awkward skill. It's a hard skill. I still have a hard time with it, but I didn't get to where I'm at today if not for the fact that I obsessively sought out feedback for myself, and I obsessively seek out feedback for my team members the same way.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you said you have to run it like a coach. I think any team lead should really run their team as a professional sports team. And one of the number one feedbacks we hear from a lot of talent is they're micromanaging me, or I don't get enough feedback. But I also think that goes both ways. Like, sometimes a leader will micromanage if they don't see, like, enough enough progress, in the talent. And now they're trying to make up for that. Sometimes they care too much, so they're trying to make sure, that you're moving forward. And other times, obviously it's just the person that's that way. And then on the other hand, I think that, where was I going with this? I blanked. Oh, there's that.
Well, you were saying like, yeah, you want to see it. A lot of times these teams are run like professional sports teams, right?
Yeah.
And really serving as that coaching role.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think it goes, this is what I was going to say, that on the feedback side, sometimes when you're not hearing feedback, you also have to be proactive as, the person in place, like the employee or the talent. You have to be proactive and also show your coach, quote unquote, what it is that you like, right? Sometimes they just might not give it, but the moment that you ask, they're like, oh yeah, absolutely, I can do that for you. People get busy in their roles, etc. And although your role is to lead the team, sometimes, things just get in the way and it kind of gets backtracked. So that's what I was trying to say, that it goes both ways. You also have to be proactive and go ask and make sure that, in a way you show them you care. And once you see that, you're like, hey, this person cares. I'll make sure to coach you. And even you as a leader now, you're like, he did care. He asked. So now I'm going to put more attention and time towards him or her.
Yeah. And I think it to almost build on that, like as the SC leader, think about that for yourself as well. Like you want feedback from business leaders on how is my function serving you and delivering value. And if you're operating in this world of I'm thinking the way that my business function leaders are, or my C-suite is thinking, you'll naturally ask those questions of, hey, when you look at the organization, like how do you see my team? How do you see our activities? What do you think we do around here? What does that drive? And as you hear that, you can start to manage up and say, well, here's what I think we should drive. And I think we should do more of because it's more valuable, because it drives to this business objective, which is tied to this driver that you want to fulfill.
Right.
And you can take that back into your team. And that helps be the lens through which you filter your coaching and feedback, where you can say, hey, like no demo's perfect, but I'm going to ignore the way that you presented this part of the product. And I'm instead going to focus on the way you responded to the customer in this moment, because that's about executive presence. Executive presence gets us to the C-suite faster, which drives ARR. That's what my CRO thinks I drive in the organization. So if I help you do that better as an SC, you'll look amazing. You'll be more impactful. Our team will get more intent. Like it all feeds into itself. So the kind of coaching you give, it's contingent on the kind of feedback you're getting as the leader from other segments of the business, because you also report to somebody who has something to say about what your team is doing as well.
Absolutely. Is there a fine line per se when you're giving feedback? Do you feel like there is a time where it's like kind of like what you just mentioned, I'm going to ignore this side of the feedback for now because I think this is the most important? Or do you feel like, hey, we got to give it all at once and make sure that they see all the challenges or, all the gaps right now, and then we build upon it? Like, what do you feel, at least as how you operate? How do you like to run your team in that sense?
Yeah, typically I prefer it. So feedback for me, one, your team member has to be in a place to receive that feedback. And I actually will do a permission ask. Say, hey, I have some feedback for you. Are you ready to have that kind of a conversation? And I always start with, hey, how do like their own self-perception, their self-awareness? Because oftentimes people will admit, hey, here are the 5 things I know I need to work on. Great.
Yeah.
Let's just work on those 5. I'm not going to introduce new concepts here because you already know what you need to work on. So let's just do that. Other times people will say, I thought it went great. Nothing I would change. And that's when you go, ooh, okay, like, would you like to hear my take? I think that feedback needs to be specific. It needs to be actionable, and it needs to be tied to very singular behaviors and outcomes. And in that sense, most people only have capacity to work on 1 or 2 things at a time. Like it's less about, are they emotionally ready to just hear the feedback? Sure. Maybe they want to hear all the feedback at once. But you also have to ask yourself, like, I need a commitment on this feedback. What will you do differently to get a different result? And in that sense, if you said, hey, I have 10 things I need you to do differently, that's an utterly unrealistic expectation to say, all right, on your next demo, I want to see 10 new things. No, the way my conversation works is, hey, here's the specific instance. Here's what happened. Here's the behavior that drove it. Here's what
Yeah.
I would recommend as a different alternative. What do you think about that approach? Do you agree with that? Great. Hey, by the time we meet in a week or 2 weeks, I'd like for you to find at least one conversation with a customer where you can try A or you
Yeah.
can try B. And I want you to tell me how it went and if you got a different result from what you saw last time, and just build on it. And if you have this view of, going back to what I said earlier, we want you to be like, we want this executive presence. Let's work on that skill. You can start to establish a roadmap and building blocks of, hey, let's start with authoritative intros. Next,
Yeah.
let's work on objection handling at the C-suite level. Then let's start to work through, challenging executives on areas they might be wrong without looking like you're mean.
Right.
Or
Right.
let's start to think through like breaking down business value drivers and thinking at that level. You can start to build on top of what you're doing. You'll get the same result. Might take a little bit more time, a little bit more investment, but you're
Yeah.
not going to overwhelm your people. They're not going to think to themselves like, I'm just a bad SE and everybody must think this feedback about me, because that's their immediate internal reaction.
Yeah.
It feels achievable. Like, I can do one thing. I can
Yeah.
do that. And they can see progress. You celebrate it. And then you just slowly start to peel those onion layers back so that nobody cries and we can have a good time.
Listen, sometimes there might be some tears, but that's okay.
That's okay. It's
Yeah.
all a part of the process, and just leading with empathy. But to your point, Anna, like if you demonstrate, I care about you,
Yeah.
this is a psychologically safe environment, your development is in my interest too, and my feedback is relevant. I always ask this, like, am I perceiving this correctly? And if somebody says, no, you've got it wrong,
Love that. Yeah.
okay, then I'm going to shut up. But if you
Yeah.
say, yes, you have that, like, Carter, you're perceiving this right, then
Yeah.
my feedback is by and large probably true, and they'll probably receive it well,
Yeah.
because what I see is what they see, and we're in alignment.
I love that. We have this motto in my company. We call it the 1% better. So we only need 1% better every day. And when you apply that in a year, that's, 37 times better. But yeah, I love the way that you also think that way and again, it can get overwhelming for people. Like you said, you want me to change 10 things by next time. It's like, it seems kind of impossible. But when you break it down step by step, or 1 to 2 things at a time, now all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I can do that. That's totally fine with me. And you also don't make like totally just kind of repeating what you said, but I think that's so important is, where you don't make them feel like they're doing everything wrong. They still need to see little wins, to celebrate that and then move on. So I love all those points. So I just thought it was important to kind of reemphasize those for sure.
Absolutely.
Cool. Is there any last thing that you might want to add, that you deem important, whether it comes to like challenges or wins or lessons, to running an SE team and obviously growing as yourself as a leader, kind of like you said, you got thrown into it. So like, what should people do in that situation?
Yeah. I think two things, and this right in line with that executive level mindset. One is, I think SEs have a unique vantage point in the organization. They see and interact with just about everybody in the business. And so oftentimes what SEs have to say about the business, process, product, people, is probably pretty close to true and correct.
Yeah.
And so mastering the ability to be right without being insufferable, to be ambitious without being a steamroller, that's going to be really, really critical, because you're going to see a lot of things that are wrong in the business. And it's tempting to make a whole lot of noise to everybody you meet of, just our roadmap, the way we sell, the way we onboard, because you're exposed to all of it. You hear all of it. And so be right without being difficult to work with, and seeing it through the lens of other people, being negotiable. And then along with that, I often hear executives will say this, like a part of being an executive is just deciding which fires to let burn and which fires to put out. and you need to do the same thing. You need to look at your team and say, let's assume nothing's fixed about the business that I think should be fixed. What can I change in my team right now that will
Right.
still increase ARR, still increase retention, and help people, be better in their current roles, even outside of my function, even if they don't get their stuff together? Just asking yourself that question and showing other segments of the business, hey, I think onboarding is broken.
Yeah.
Here is exactly where, and here's where I think my team can actually help you without your team doing anything. It's very different than saying, hey, handoff's broken. You guys need more infrastructure and how you log product feature requests. Like, nobody's going to say yes to that. That's just noise. But you come with a solution and you show that your team is willing to take a step in their direction. I mean, that people will give you their trust immediately. And I found that I've even had people say, like, I don't know why I just give you so much trust, Carter. I just do. And it's because I'm making steps towards you first, to not be a steamroller, to not be insufferable, but to still be true and concise and really pointed about how to make everybody better. SCs are in a really unique position to do that.
I love that. Yeah, I agree. And I think one little thing I would add to that is, at least what I do with my team as well, is when I see that, they're maybe too overwhelmed, or, there's too much going on and they're kind of running like with the chicken with their head cut off, and, they're trying to catch up with everything. I also even offer to help, whether they take it or not. Obviously, it's up to them. But I'll offer to help, and they see that as like, hey, she's not beneath me, like, or, above me. Like, she's willing to come to my level and help me. Like, I know she's a leader, but at the same time, she's willing to, get her hands dirty and get work done. So I would add that as well. As a leader, that's super important, because like you said, it leads to this thing of like, I trust you so much and I don't know why. And then, it's the little things that you do every day as a leader that build that trust. And then all of a sudden they don't know why, but they just trust you. And obviously that's what you want with your team. So I love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Carter. I really appreciate you taking the time being here and dropping all his value. This was awesome. I hope you enjoyed it.